Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. And today we're going to talk specifically about labor migration. So of course, in many other videos, we have talked about different types of migration, why people decide to move, how they make those decisions, all the different types of migrants there are out there, those that are more voluntary types of migration and those that are more involuntary types of migration. Well, labor migration in general, we can think of as a more voluntary type of migration. But what is migration in general? So of course, I've had many videos on this topic, but in broad terms, a migrant is someone who changes their habitual place of residence. Now, this can be for a shorter or a longer period of time within a country, so that would be internal migration or across international country borders. And again, it can be voluntary or involuntary, or it can have a number of different reasons. Today, we're really focusing on labor migration. So what is the definition of labor migration, or who is a labor migrant? Well, there's no universally accepted definition of who a labor migrant is. As far as the International Labor Organization is concerned, they often talk more about migrant workers. And a migrant worker is all international migrants who are currently employed or unemployed and seeking employment in their present country of residence. So you can already see that there might be a slight difference between a migrant worker or someone who has migrated and is now working than maybe a labor migrant in general. So a labor migrant in general, you could think of as someone who maybe migrated specifically for the purpose of work or taking on some kind of employment. Whereas of course, migrants can migrate for any kind of different reasons and then still end up as workers. So they might be migrant workers, but I would say in many country statistics, they might not necessarily show up as labor migrants if they don't specifically have a visa or a residence permit specifically for labor or to work in that country. So you can see there's already slight differences between kind of how countries define labor migrants versus migrant workers or migrants who are also workers. Now let's look at some global labor migration trends. So we know that there are more than 272 million international migrants globally. Of those, around 245 million are above the age of 15. So these are people who we would already start to think are perhaps eligible to be working. And within that, you can see here that around 169 million international migrants are actually migrant workers. And this means that actually more than 60% of international migrants today are actually migrant workers. Now, this is generally data from 2019. Again, pre-pandemic situations. We don't have as much up-to-date data currently, but we do know that during the global pandemic, migration flows did change a little bit, but migration stocks, or the number of people that are already currently in a country, didn't change very much. If you want to learn more about the difference between migration stocks and migrant flows, then you can check out my video on that here. Of course, I'll make sure to also link it in the description below. But we can generalize that the situation in 2019 is quite similar to this situation that we see today. And a lot of this information is from the International Labor Organization. Here we can see the distribution of migrant workers again in 2019, where they were in the world. And of this 169 million migrant workers, you can see that quite a large proportion of these are in Europe and Central Asia, then followed by the Americas, then quite a bit in the Arab states, also in the Asia and Pacific region, and then in Africa. So if we look at it in this way by these specific regions, it's really Europe and Central Asia and North America, or the Americas in general, that have the largest shares of labor migrants. Now, of course, there is a difference here. So in the Arab states, there's a much smaller population, fewer countries, but with quite a lot of people. So if we would look at this as a percentage of the population of these countries, we'd probably see a different story, with a lot of the Gulf state countries, for example, being those that maybe host the highest numbers of labor migrants as a percentage of their population. Now, if we also break down migrant workers by male and female, we know that in general nowadays there's only slightly more male migrants in general than female migrants. But if we look specifically at labor migrants, we do see more male labor migrants than female migrants, with close to 59% of international labor migrants that are male and around 42% that are female. Here again, you can see the distribution of international migrant workers by kind of broad subregion. Again, here you can see Northern, Southern, and Western Europe with the highest percentage of international migrant workers. So this now is broken down a little bit more than what I showed you before, followed by North America, then the Arab states, then Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Central and Eastern Asia, Southern Asia, Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern Asia, and North Africa. So again, you can see, really those top three big players, Western, Southern, Northern Europe, North America, and the Arab states. Now, if we break this down also by gender, what's quite interesting to see here is where we see more women represented or where we see more men represented. And what's quite interesting is that if you look at Europe, so here meaning Northern, Southern, and Western Europe, as well as North America, we actually see more female migration, more female labor migration in those regions than in the Arab states, where in the Arab states, it is much more male migration that we see. And so it's quite interesting to see these differences across different subregions. In this graph here, you can see that Arab states and Southern Asian states have the smallest share of female labor migrants, whereas Central and Western Asia, Eastern Europe, Northern and Southern and Western Europe, really have quite a high proportion of female migrants. Now, finally, we can look at the labor force participation rates of migrants compared to non-migrants in these broad subregions. And what's quite interesting is that you can see actually in most cases, migrants have much higher labor force participation rates than non-migrants in these different subregions, so actually in most countries. And we see this to a greater extent in the Arab states and in European states, where we really see that labor migrants or migrants in general have a much higher labor force participation rate than the general population. So of course that makes sense. We know that most migration is of working age populations. We know that over 60% of migration in general is labor migration or migrant workers. So it does make sense, considering the different types of selection that migrants go through, that they might be more represented on the labor markets, at least in labor force participation rates, and if we compare them to natives. So I hope that just gave you a really quick look at what's going on globally with regard to labor migration. If you're a labor migrant yourself, as am I, please comment down below, let us know your experiences. And of course, if you have questions, please do put those in the comment section. Add also useful things for each other. The idea of this channel is to be a helpful resource for everyone so that we can all learn more. If you like this video, of course, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the videos we upload every week on different migration issues. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.